Who would have thought that Stanley Tookie Williams, the ruthless Crips co-founder who once ruled Los Angeles with violence, would later spend his final years writing children's books and earning multiple Nobel Peace Prize nominations? But even that redemption couldn't erase his past crimes. In his final 24 hours, California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger played a pivotal role, denying clemency and sealing Tookie's fate for good. The world watched as a man of terror and transformation faced his ultimate reckoning. The early years. Born on December 29, 1953, in Shreveport, Louisiana, Stanley Tookie Williams came into the world in a time and place where opportunities for young black Americans were scarce. His parents separated early in his life, and this change marked the beginning of a turbulent journey. In search of a better life, his mother packed up their belongings and moved them to South Central Los Angeles, a decision that would place Tookie at the heart of a community grappling with poverty, racial tension, and violence. As a young boy, Tookie was full of energy, often described as both mischievous and fiercely protective of those he cared about. His mother worked tirelessly to provide for him, but life in South Central LA wasn't easy. Their neighborhood was full of families struggling to make ends meet, surrounded by gang violence and systemic issues like redlining and limited access to quality education. The promise of a better life in California often felt like a distant dream. In school, Tookie struggled to find his footing. He was bright and capable, but often found himself distracted or disinterested in traditional classroom settings. His teachers noted his charisma and leadership potential, but these traits went unnoticed in an environment that lacked the resources to nurture them. Instead, Tookie gravitated toward the streets, where a different kind of education awaited. The 1960s were a time of great upheaval, and South Central LA was no exception. Stanley was a teenager by then, and the civil rights movement was in full swing. But the promise of equality hadn't reached Tookie's neighborhood. The Watts riots of 1965 had left a lasting scar on the city. Sparked by an incident of police brutality, the riots highlighted the deep racial tensions simmering beneath the surface. Instead, systemic racism and police brutality created a divide between the community and those meant to protect it. Despite the chaos around him, there were glimpses of a different path for Tookie. Friends and neighbors recall him as someone who could light up a room with his presence. He had a sharp wit and a natural ability to connect with people. In another life, these traits might have made him a successful businessman, a community leader, or even a politician. But in the world he knew, those same qualities made him a natural leader in the streets. Tookie's sense of loyalty was unmatched. He often defended younger kids in the neighborhood from bullies and wasn't afraid to stand up to authority figures when he felt something was unjust. This protective instinct would later become a double-edged sword, guiding both his early foray into gang life and his eventual transformation into an anti-gang activist. Stanley Tookie Williams was no ordinary teenager. Together with Raymond Washington, Tookie founded the Crips, one of the most notorious street gangs in Los Angeles, in 1971. What began as a group aimed at neighborhood protection soon spiraled into a cycle of violence, power struggles, and ruthless crime. The Crips quickly grew beyond their original purpose. Their reputation for ruthlessness made them a force to be reckoned with. Within a few years, the gang expanded across Los Angeles, gaining members and igniting violent turf wars with other gangs, most notably the Bloods. Tookie's leadership was instrumental in the Crips' rise. His imposing physical presence, charisma, and readiness to use violence earned him both fear and respect. By the mid-1970s, the Crips were no longer just a local gang. They had become a citywide phenomenon, deeply intertwined with the drug trade and criminal enterprises. Rival gangs responded in kind, leading to escalating violence. The once loosely organized fights between neighborhood groups turned into deadly battles. Guns replaced fists, and the body count began to rise. For Tookie, survival meant staying one step ahead, and he did so with a brutal efficiency that cemented his place as one of the most feared gang leaders in Los Angeles. By the late 1970s, the violence had reached a boiling point, and Tookie's name became synonymous with danger. In 1979, two separate crimes would forever alter the course of his life. The crimes. On the night of February 28, 1979, Albert Owens, a 26-year-old clerk at a 7-Eleven convenience store in Whittier, California, was nearing the end of a routine shift. He likely expected nothing more than a quiet evening of restocking shelves and ringing up customers. Instead, the night ended in a tragic act of violence that shocked the community. According to prosecutors, Stanley Tookie Williams, along with 3 accomplices, entered the store with the intent to rob it, complied fully with their demands. He handed over the money from the register and made no attempt to resist. Despite his cooperation, prosecutors alleged that Tookie decided to make an example of him. They claimed Tookie forced Owens to lie face down on the floor, taking a shotgun and firing a fatal shot into the back of his head. Witnesses later testified that Tookie mocked the sounds Owens made as he died, turning a cold-blooded murder into an act of cruelty. The motive for Owens' killing seemed bafflingly senseless. Some suggested it was to eliminate a witness, ensuring no one could identify them later. Others speculated that it was a calculated act of intimidation, designed to reinforce Tookie's reputation for ruthlessness. Whatever the reason, the murder left a young man dead, his family grieving, and a community reeling. Just 12 days later, on March 11, 1979, another crime shook Los Angeles to its core. This time, the victims were a family of 3 who ran a small, modest motel. Tsai Shai Yang, his wife Yen-Yi Yang, and their 43-year-old daughter Yi-Chen Lin were working late at their business when terror struck. Prosecutors alleged that Tookie, armed and accompanied by accomplices, targeted the motel for a robbery. The Yang family, much like Owens, complied with the intruder's demands, offering no resistance. Yet this act of obedience did not spare their lives. One by one, Tookie allegedly shot each family member at close range with a shotgun, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. The details of the murders were disturbing. The brutality went beyond the need to rob. It felt calculated, almost personal. Tsai Shai, Yen-Yi, and Yi-Chen were described as kind, hardworking immigrants pursuing the American dream. Their deaths devastated not only their family, but the wider immigrant community in Los Angeles. The paltry amount stolen was a mere $100, which only amplified the senselessness of the crime. Investigators and prosecutors speculated that the motive for the murders extended beyond financial gain. Some believed it was a statement of power, a way for Tookie to demonstrate his authority and instill fear, both in his rivals and within his own gang. This crime cemented the Crips' reputation as a violent, unstoppable force in Los Angeles. The back-to-back murders sent shockwaves through the city. Residents of Whittier and the surrounding areas were gripped by fear, feeling that even their quiet neighborhoods were no longer safe. The brutal nature of the killings, combined with the apparent randomness of the victims, left people questioning what kind of person could commit such atrocities. The media coverage only fueled the panic, with headlines branding Tookie and the Crips as symbols of unchecked violence. The Los Angeles Police Department had already been tracking Tookie for some time. However, it wasn't until the brutal murder in 1979 that the hunt for him became a top priority. Witness testimonies and forensic evidence tied these crimes to Tookie. Law enforcement saw his arrest as a significant blow to the Crips and a step toward addressing the escalating violence in Los Angeles. When officers finally moved in, it wasn't a quiet affair. Tookie, known for his physical strength and defiance, reportedly didn't make it easy for the Los Angeles Police Department. His arrest made the headlines that signaled the fall of a feared figure in gang circles. To the public, it felt like justice for the victims. To others, especially within his community, it raised questions about whether he was being targeted for his reputation rather than solid evidence. The trial. Tookie's trial was as much about him as it was about the larger issue of gang violence gripping Los Angeles. From the beginning, the prosecution painted him as the face of the problem, a ruthless gang leader who had taken multiple lives without remorse. They leaned heavily on witness testimonies, including those from former associates who claimed Tookie had confessed to the crimes. One key piece of evidence was a 12-gauge shotgun that prosecutors argued was linked to the murders. Ballistic tests and witness accounts placed it at the scene, further solidifying their case. The prosecution argued that Tookie had killed Albert Owens to eliminate a witness, despite the young man's compliance during the robbery. In the case of the Yang family, they emphasized the sheer brutality of the killings, suggesting they were motivated by more than just robbery. Tookie, however, maintained his innocence. He argued that the testimonies against him were coerced and that he was being framed because of his notorious status as a gang leader. His defense team struggled to counter the damning evidence and the prosecution's narrative. The media frenzy surrounding the trial didn't help, often portraying Tookie as the embodiment of gang violence. Public opinion was largely swayed against him, making a fair trial even more challenging. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. For the families of the victims, it was a moment of closure. For Tookie, it marked the beginning. Despite his cooperation, prosecutors alleged that Tookie decided to make an example of him. Tookie Williams was sentenced to death and sent to San Quentin State Prison. The courtroom was somber as the judge handed down the sentence, citing the gravity of Tookie's crimes and his role in perpetuating violence through the Crips. Tookie's reputation as a gang leader played a significant role in the decision. His perceived lack of remorse and the heinous nature of the murders left little room for leniency in the eyes of the court. San Quentin was a world apart from the streets Tookie once ruled. The notorious prison housed some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, and life on death row was bleak. For Tookie, it was a time of reckoning, a place where he would confront his past and grapple with the reality of his situation. Stanley Tookie Williams' early years in prison were marked by defiance and anger. Convicted of heinous crimes, he refused to acknowledge guilt, viewing the system as inherently biased against him. But as time passed, the isolation of death row forced him to reflect. The man who once commanded fear on the streets began to look inward, sparking a remarkable transformation. While incarcerated, Tookie channeled his energy into writing, using his experiences to deter others from following his path. His children's books, such as Tookie Speaks Out Against Gang Violence, were straightforward and heartfelt, targeting at-risk youth. Through them, he shared the harsh realities of gang life, hoping to steer kids away from the choices that had led to his downfall. Among his most impactful works was his memoir, Blue Rage, Black Redemption. This deeply personal account chronicled his journey from a troubled childhood and rise as a gang leader to his eventual reckoning on death row. The book was raw and unflinching, offering readers a window into the mind of a man grappling with the damage he had caused. It became a beacon of hope for those seeking proof that change was possible, even in the darkest circumstances. Tookie's transformation didn't stop with his writing. He became a vocal advocate for peace, working to broker truces between rival gangs. His unique credibility as a former gang leader gave his message a weight that few could replicate. Schools, community centers, and anti-gang programs across the globe used his writings to educate and inspire. The impact of his work garnered international recognition. Tookie was nominated multiple times for the Nobel Peace Prize and the Nobel Prize in Literature. These accolades brought attention to his efforts, sparking debates about redemption and justice. Supporters hailed him as living proof that even the most hardened individuals could change. To them, Tookie represented the possibility of a better future for at-risk youth. Despite his advocacy and the positive impact of his work, Tookie's legal team faced an uphill battle to overturn his conviction. They pointed to inconsistencies in the original trial, including alleged witness coercion and gaps in the evidence. Appeals were filed and reviewed, but each was denied, leaving his death sentence unchanged. Activists, religious leaders, and celebrities rallied to his cause, urging clemency as his execution date loomed. Figures like Jamie Foxx, Snoop Dogg, and Danny Glover argued that Tookie's transformation made him invaluable. They pointed out that his writings and outreach had saved countless lives, and his death would rob society of a powerful voice for change. However, his critics remained steadfast. Victims' rights advocates and law enforcement officials argued that Tookie's transformation didn't absolve him of the pain and loss he had caused. They also criticized his refusal to provide authorities with information about gang activities, claiming it undermined his claims of redemption. To them, his silence was proof that he hadn't fully renounced his past. The clemency debate culminated with California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. His decision to deny clemency highlighted the gravity of Tookie's crimes and the lingering questions about his role in them. Schwarzenegger acknowledged Tookie's advocacy, but argued it couldn't erase the harm he had inflicted. The decision polarized public opinion, drawing both outrage and relief. For some, the denial of clemency was justice served, a necessary conclusion to a life marred by violence. For others, it was a missed opportunity to recognize the power of redemption and the potential for rehabilitation, even for those who had committed grievous acts. The last 24 hours. The journey of Stanley Tookie Williams from co-founder of the Crips to a Nobel Peace Prize nominee culminated in his final hours at San Quentin State Prison. On December 13, 2005, the world watched as the clock ticked toward midnight, marking the end of a life that had been a mix of violence, redemption, and controversy. By 6 p.m., the prison's routine gave way to somber final preparations. Williams was strip-searched, provided with a fresh set of clothes, and escorted to a designated death cell. This 45-square-foot room, just steps away from the execution chamber, became his final holding place under the constant surveillance of a sergeant and 2 officers. Inside the cell, Williams occupied himself by reading letters from supporters worldwide. Over 50 arrived that day alone, sent from places as distant as Italy and Israel. Many were from children expressing prayers and admiration for his advocacy against gang violence. A prison chaplain stood nearby, offering counsel, but Williams chose not to reach out. Despite being offered a sedative to ease his nerves, he declined, maintaining composure in the face of what lay ahead. Outside the prison, the atmosphere was anything but calm. A crowd of about 2,000 protesters gathered, carrying signs, chanting, and pleading for a last-minute reprieve. Among them were celebrities, activists, and anti-death penalty advocates, all united in their belief that Tookie's life should be spared. "Tookie must live, and Tookie doesn't deserve to die," echoed through the night. Civil rights leader Jesse Jackson, a vocal supporter, criticized California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's decision to allow the execution to proceed, calling it revenge over redemption. Jackson argued that taking Williams' life did nothing to ensure public safety, instead framing it as a political move to Project Toughness. Despite the storm outside the gates, Williams remained composed. He declined a formal last meal, requesting only small cartons of milk instead. Even in these final moments, his stoicism carried him forward, refusing to let the state's preparations rob him of his dignity. At 9:30 p.m., Williams' legal team filed an emergency petition in a last-ditch effort to save him. They presented statements from a 4th witness who claimed that other inmates had attempted to frame Williams for the murders. Yet this appeal, like the others before it, was swiftly denied. Governor Schwarzenegger once again stood firm, declaring that Williams' transformation and advocacy were insufficient to outweigh the severity of his crimes. With that decision, any remaining hope was extinguished. As midnight approached, the time came for Williams to face his fate. He was escorted into the execution chamber, a cold, semi-octagonal room bathed in sterile light. At its center was a padded gurney where his life would end. Despite the gravity of the moment, Williams walked in with an air of quiet strength, his head held high. He calmly laid down on the gurney, where guards began the process of securing him with thick straps. A nurse stepped forward to insert the IV lines necessary for the lethal injection, but complications arose. Finding a vein in his left arm proved difficult, causing the process to take nearly 20 minutes. At one point, Williams, visibly restless, asked the staff, "You doing that right?" His words were a mix of concern and quiet frustration as the preparation continued. As the nurse struggled, Williams turned his gaze toward his loved ones seated among the witnesses. Though his words were inaudible, he mouthed something to them, a silent farewell that carried the weight of the moment. At 12:21 a.m., the execution began. The first drug administered was 5 grams of sodium pentothal, a powerful sedative designed to render him unconscious. Within moments, Williams' body relaxed, his breathing slowing as the drug took effect. This was followed by pancuronium bromide, which paralyzed his muscles and halted his ability to breathe. Finally, potassium chloride was injected to stop his heart. Witnesses in the room watched in silence as Williams' body lay still. Among them were journalists, state officials, and 5 personal witnesses Williams had selected. The somber atmosphere was punctuated by sobs from his supporters. Barbara Bicknell, a close ally and advocate, cried out, declaring, "The state of California just killed an innocent man." Her anguish reflected the deep divisions surrounding Williams' case. At 12:35 a.m., the warden officially pronounced Stanley Tookie Williams dead. The room remained silent as the announcement echoed, marking the end of a life that had sparked both fear and hope.